Hello, my name is Logan and I'm your host, the Mighty Pirate. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about Solaris 7. So, Solaris 7 is the important planet in its system because it is naturally rich in water. So there's a abundance of fish. Abundance of fish means that you can feed a lot of poor people for not very much money. So, with that in mind, it seemed like the perfect place to build mech factories. Um, Back in 2695, back in the first Star League Defense Force era, there was a private showing between a Phoenix Hawk and a Sentinel, and it was extremely well received by the Star League senior staff, and it became somewhat of a tradition for the various mech manufacturers to showcase their battle mechs in this way in a 1v1 duel. Eventually, the common folks started noticing what was going on and they started watching the battles from the sidelines and wagering on the outcome of these various fights. And it became extremely popular on Solaris 7, and eventually it became publicized and televised all across the Inner Sphere. This attracted mech warriors from all over the Inner Sphere, and they wanted to be part of the action. So each of the great houses set up a district within Solaris City, and Solaris City has 6 districts, one for each of the great houses, and then an international zone. The international zone is where the starport is, so everybody has to go through the local Solaris 7 government before they can go out to their various districts. And it keeps everybody sort of in check there. Solaris 7 is officially owned by the Lyrian Commonwealth, but since all the great houses have a claim on it, it remains relatively neutral. There's not a lot of fighting that happens on the planet of Solaris until much later in the timeline. I'm going to discuss that here in a minute. So Solaris 7 has its 5 districts for the houses, and each of those districts has its own private arena. At the end of the year, the top 20 pilots in those arenas will go ahead and compete against each other, and they'll compete for the International Cup for Solaris 7. And that is extremely, lots of people watch that across the Inner Sphere, and they all have their own claim in it and we're willing to put their money on it as well. So with that in mind, what happens during before the Jihad, there is an important note because there's the FedCom Civil War, and it creates a lot of turbulence on Solaris 7 between loyalties, and then the Davian and the Lyrian loyalists go at it in the streets. The Comstar garrison forces just got transferred off planet, and so there was no one telling them not to fight, so they're fighting in the streets. And this goes on all the way from 3062 to what I expect to be 3067. And the reason why that's relevant is because right after that, in 3068, the Word of Blake invades. And the Word of Blake pretty much takes Solaris 7 with little to no effort. The reason being is because a lot of the great houses had deployed their forces off planet to help support the war effort, and the invasion was known as Operation Showtime. This seemed like a great plan for the Word of Blake. However, they didn't really think it all the way through because it's a planet full of gladiators. And if you give them something with an engine and 2 legs, they are going to go ahead and fight you. And they did. All the way from 3068, when the initial invasion happened, all the way into 3071. And they called themselves the Star League Home Defense League. I think that this is a really cool point in the lore because it's just sort of not everybody cowed over to the Word of Blake in that timeline, and it's just kind of cool to think about a bunch of gladiators using whatever they can find to beat what would be considered some cutting edge technology at the time. However, Because of all this, basically all the mech factories are destroyed. By 3079, there's only one company on Solaris able to make anything other than retro mechs and then salvage mechs. So it's pretty dark times for the Solaris 7. However, the Lyrian Alliance winds up joining the Republic of the Sphere. Uh, Solaris 7 manages to keep all of its restoration efforts on rebuilding the arenas and restocking the arenas. And the Lyrian Alliance just sort of turns a blind eye to it. And as a result, as long as you're paying your taxes, they don't mind. And that's what I got to say about Solaris 7. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that this wasn't too much of a bore. I will be making more videos in the near future. I will see you guys next time.